Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. I have first of all, thank you to the Lisbon Club for this wonderful invitation to a theme that is really large, really transversal, but critical in many ways. So we are now going to start this panel on geopolitics, critical new materials, and energy transition. So, as you can all see, a very easy theme, very easy answers for all of this. And we agreed, or let me say this differently, I decided that we would perhaps do a first round of 5 minutes each, just to give you the basic conclusions, the basic ideas. We have with us four very distinguished guests, speakers who work in different fields of this enormous world. So therefore, we should take advantage of all of them. And then we do a second round on what we consider to be the main challenges of these different sub-areas. So I will follow the alphabetical order with one exception. I'll be the last person speaking. And therefore, I give the floor to Bianca.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's, well, I hope that we can actually have an energizing discussion today, especially because we are after lunch. So I think that, we need it. But first of all, thank you very much for the invitation at this event on such a key topic today. Just maybe a few words about me and the work that I'm currently doing. I'm leading Cleantech for Iberia, which is an initiative powered by Bill Gates Foundation for clean energy development and deployment of clean energy, breakthrough energy, and other 20 leading investors, innovators, banks, universities, family offices across the Iberian Peninsula. And our mission is to turn the Iberian Peninsula into Europe's next clean tech industrial leader. And I would like to stress here industrial, because I think this is the key. So we need to speed up the green reindustrialization of the region and of Europe in general. And of course, the critical minerals play a key role in the scalability of clean technologies. So we basically bring together this coalition of the leading investors and innovators to be a bridge between the investment and innovation community and the government, and to build a breakthrough innovation ecosystem in clean technologies, which is actually key for the clean technologies to thrive. Over the last year, since our ignition, actually we've been focusing on how to build a fit-for-purpose industrial strategy that fosters the scalability of clean technologies in Iberia, focusing on those technologies where Spain and Portugal actually have a key competitive edge, like, for example, the green hydrogen, like, for example, the storage technologies, long-duration energy storage, for example, that gives flexibility to the grid, and especially in Iberia, where we are a superpower of clean energy. Let's not forget that Iberia, has a competitive edge in terms of cheap, abundant, and clean energy, 3 to 4 times cheaper than in Germany, for example, which actually is reshuffling the industrial maps in Europe as we speak. So we have a change of the center of gravity at the global level, but also within Europe itself. I hope we can come back to this later. But also in Iberia, 20% of the green hydrogen projects worldwide are happening here. So also this is a key point. We have a strong industrial base. And we also have a growing momentum in terms of investment in emerging clean technologies, because over the last 5 years, the investment in this space has increased 6 fold. So really a good momentum for Iberia to really punch above its weight and be a leader in green reindustrialization to help Europe to become home of clean technologies. And of course, taking a helicopter view here, this all makes sense and it's urgent now. I would say we are at a scale or fail moment in Europe's clean tech innovation story because of course, as we discussed a little bit already this morning, these power shifts are taking place as we speak. We know that there's a tectonic shift in energy, in clean technologies in general, globally, with, on one hand, US really making a dent in the clean tech space. We know with IRA, US put on the table $369 billion to accelerate this. If we look on the other side of the map, China basically is at the front runner in clean tech investment, but also in manufacturing with already a leading role over US and EU. So really, I would say a make or break moment now in clean tech, and certainly at this stage, we need to look into where are the power shift, how we can actually make the most of this moment. And just to wrap up this first part, I think that, it's not everything about doom. As we've heard a bit this morning, we were discussing before that, we all feel a little bit, our heart sank a little bit when you think about, this geopolitical dynamics and also the fact that, where is the way out? I think that we have the way out. And we don't have a silver bullet, but I think innovation really comes close. And maybe it's because I'm constantly talking with entrepreneurs and with startups, scale-ups in our coalition, the leading scale-ups in Europe that are part of our coalition really reconfirm this daily, including, of course, in critical minerals, where we have an opportunity to reuse, to recycle, the circular economy, and we are not making the most of it at the moment. So having said this, I leave it I look forward to diving into more debate on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bianca, and also thank you so much for keeping up with the time. I will just say this very slightly and very gently. I'll be a dictator with time, because this is such an important and key issue that we don't talk enough about. And therefore, I would really like for us to have the second part of our panel, a good Q&A discussion. So, without no pressure, Henry, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. It's, as you said, a very important, critical moment, and I agree with Bianca about scale or fail, which I'll touch upon. But if you look at critical minerals, so these are minerals that every country has a slightly different definition, but basically minerals that are used in critical technologies such as clean energy technologies or semiconductors, other things like that, and minerals that are often concentrated in their supply. And one of the areas I mostly look at is clean energy and electric vehicles and batteries. And if you picture the world, map of the world, basically you have minerals at the moment being dug up in Latin America, Africa, Australia, and they all basically go to China. So the whole time as we speak, our boats just shipping stuff to China. So China hoovers up all the minerals essentially, and this is true for iron ore or anything you want to look at. And it turns these into useful products. And the discussion about critical minerals, we often lose fact that even if we ship loads of lithium or materials to Europe today, we don't know what to do with it because we don't have the processing or manufacturing ability to turn it into something useful. This is really critical. They're not useful until they're processed and turned into manufactured goods. And that's what China does so well, and it's what it does for the world. So let's take something like batteries, lithium from South America, from Australia, nickel from Indonesia, cobalt from DRC. They all go to China, and then they're processed. And it's quite a difficult, complicated process to convert these minerals that have dug up into very high purity minerals that can be used in an electric vehicle battery. Because when you're driving around your car, like I'm driving in my electric vehicle, you don't want it to catch fire, right? You don't want it to explode. So everything has to be very high purity. And it's really this step that China dominates over 60+% of the share of the global market. And so when we in the West think about reducing our reliance on China, creating new supply chains, it's really these steps that we need to grapple with. And the fundamental difficulty is that they're energy intense, they're low margin, they're not particularly attractive businesses to be in. And China has turned its advantage from being a low cost, low labor, low environmental standards 20 years ago and has moved up the value chain so that it's now doing everything from the processing to producing the electric vehicles. So when we talk about the geopolitics, as it stands now, it's basically a China story. And the energy transition at the moment is quite a China story. If you think about electric vehicles, 60% in China. If you think about solar installations, most of them in China. So that's why trying to reduce our reliance on China is so difficult, both from the supply side, it not being a very attractive economic industry to be in, and the demand side. If most of your demand's in China, if you're a mining company, that's your biggest customer. So it's tricky to de-risk. So where do we stand? I'll just talk briefly about the US and EU. So critical minerals have gone to the very top of the political agenda, and we've seen two, I think, incredible responses. One in the US, we've seen this Inflation Reduction Act. We've seen money from Department of Energy, and just a whole change in their philosophy, which is we won't leave it to markets anymore. Markets can't solve the problem. We need to step in. The government needs to step in and provide money. And we've seen in the US that they've combined subsidies, tax credits, billions of dollars with tariffs, with basically a complete ban on Chinese critical minerals. And the US is creating a ward-off garden, trying to create its own market. And then Europe has also introduced policies, Critical Raw Materials Act, and it's talked about the same worries about vulnerability, but it hasn't so far backed it up with subsidies that the US has or tax credits. So we haven't seen the same speed of development. And both these two things have occurred at a time when China has overinvested in critical mineral, not only mining, processing, production, so that all these markets now, critical minerals, are in surplus. And surplus expected to last for this decade. So this means if you're trying to build a new project in the West, or you're facing markets that are well supplied, so it's very difficult to get investment. China knows this. That's why we don't know it's by design or just the way it happens, but they have invested so much that markets are in surplus and oversupplied. So that means that then the policy has to do the heavy lifting, and the governments, the US and Europe, have to decide what are we willing to do to resolve this problem, and what support can we provide. And I think the US has said in certain areas they will just throw money at it to solve the problem. But Europe is less clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. And now I give the floor to Hung Tran, and 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. My name is Hung Tran. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and since I retired from the IMF 5 years ago, I basically work on looking at geopolitics and geoeconomics. And in the past year, I really spent a lot of time looking at the contention between US, China, and the role of the Global South in that contention, what the Global South countries can do to have a seat at the table instead of being on the menu. I also look at the geopolitics of energy transition. So according to American slide, I give you the conclusion first, and in the second round, I will go into more detailed analysis. Number one, green and clean energy products consume far more critical minerals than conventional products. EV uses 200 kilograms of critical minerals compared to 30 kilograms consumed by conventional car. That means the 12 or so critical minerals are in great demand. Problem is, several of those, with the current mining production and new mines on the planning board, by 2030 will not be sufficient to meet the demand of the energy transition. Leads to number two, the great competition to control supply chains that my colleague has talked about. US, EU have done many things. China, of course, has started a long time ago, particularly with the Belt and Road initiatives, controlling 65% of minerals and 85% of the processing capacity of those minerals, and in the final products, even more. I think what the US and EU have done has one impact only, that is to raise the prices of these products, without so far being able to really offer a viable alternative supply sources for these critical minerals. So that's lead to number three, the impact of geopolitics on energy transition is becoming clear. Twofold, higher cost, much higher cost. Some estimates have put the additional cost of tariffs, prohibition, exclusion of Chinese products on the Western markets at $6 trillion between now and 2035. That comes on top of what many estimate the amount of money needed to be invested in new energy products, about 8 to 10 trillion a year. Last year, the world managed to put in 1.3 trillion. So we are really talking about huge gap between what we are able to do and has been doing, what is needed, and on top of that, the higher cost caused by geopolitics. Second impact of geopolitics is delay. The timetable for net zero, 2040 for EU, 2050 for US, 2060 for China, probably will be delayed. I just give you one example. The past summer is the hottest summer on record. Yes. The past 12 months have seen surface temperature in the world average 1.64 degrees Celsius, above the 1.5 degrees Celsius that the Paris Agreement has hoped to achieve. So forget that, that's done. We failed that. The next hope is we can manage to keep things below 2 degrees Celsius. Personally, I don't have a lot of hope, but that's where we are. Number four, therefore, the competition to control the supply chain for economic security, for national security is intense. And we can go into that later on. But so far, I think whatever policy the US has put up, Inflation Reduction Act, in the EU Critical Mineral Act, as I said, so far has managed to raise the cost, but not offer a viable alternative. Number five, we also see divergences, competition, also on another sphere, and that is regulatory and trade policy divergences and competition. EU has a very clear, very specific, and in my view, too many regulations and directives about environmental standards, adding to the cost of doing business in the EU. That's why the EU economy is not doing very well, but also posing barriers to trade, particularly from developing countries, particularly from countries in Africa. They have to meet these high standards, otherwise they have to pay tax to equalize the cost of production there with the cost of production here. Not very good for EU, nor for the global economy. And number six is international discord. Because of the geopolitical contention, we see more and more the lack of trust, the lack of doing things together, and at international fora like COP28 in Dubai, COP29 in Azerbaijan in November, more and more disagreement, discord. At the end of the day, it boils down to money. Who is going to pay for climate mitigation and climate transition? And here again, what is needed, what has been done, big gap. The world community 10 years ago promised $100 billion per year in terms of transfer for climate finance to developing countries. 2 years ago, the OECD declared victory. We achieved that goal. But it turns out that 1/3 of that calculation was money being shifted or transferred from existing development budgets, not net new money. So we failed what we promised. The COP28 agreed to set up a loss and damage fund to help developing countries mitigate the impact of climate changes. So far, the international community managed to raise $600 million compared with the trillion needed. And US and China, the two biggest polluters, have not participated. So with that, to cheer you up,
Yes.
I end within time.
Thank you so much. We were very optimistic on this panel, not anymore. So I now give the floor to Tsutomu Sato, and 5 minutes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tsutomu Sato. I'm very honored to be here today. Thank you very much. And I worked for Japan Bank for International Cooperation for 30 years, so I'm in the financial sector guy. And I also joined UNFCCC COP15 in 2009. That was my turning point, and I was involved in the climate financing since the COP15. And yes, last year I joined Nakasone Peace Institute, and that institute has set up economic security research center last year, and I have one research project, and I would like to introduce about the Asian Pacific information on this raw material issue. So first, my point is on this issue is that so not only for Japan but also all over the world were very much concerned about China's dominant position on this raw material supply chain. Actually, as a matter of fact, last year, we in say Japanese economy has got a receipt from China that they are going to squeeze some export on some raw materials such as gallium, germanium, and graphite. It is technical, but it is say about gallium. China produces 90% of gallium all over the world, and we Japanese utilize 40%. And we make LED optical devices and the semiconductors with gallium. So if the Chinese stop the export gallium, then we are in a disruption. But unfortunately, there is not such a big issue. But anyway, we are very irritated this situation and try to make some kind of sustainable, resilient framework. And last year, in a G7 summit in Hiroshima, we present economic security idea to the G7 group. And we still keeping some discussion with like-minded countries like US, Australia, and other ASEAN countries. recently, not recently, sorry, we have one project with Australia for Linus project in a critical mineral issue. And they try to make some maybe refinery project in the future. So I'd like to also mention about the Korean situation, because they are also very much depend on raw materials to China. And there's one trouble in 2021. It is a material, Uri. My pronunciation is okay? Uri. In Korea, they need Uri to make a treatment for the gas of the diesel engine vehicles. So it is very common in Korea. I don't know the situation in Japan. But anyway, Korea, suddenly China stopped exporting. I mean, China squeezed some portion of Uri to the Korea. And I found that it is not a kind of economic coercion. It is really a market issue, because Korean government make a research, and even in the domestic market in China, there are shortage of Uri. It is, and I read one article that there is another story between Australia and China. There is a terrible relationship, and China makes some kind of economic coercion to decrease the import of such as wine, maybe beef, seafood, and coal. And due to that, decrease of import coal to China from Australia, then because coal is material to product Uri, so it means China stop import coal from Australia. Then in a domestic market, the production of Uri has decreased. Then Korea cannot import Uri. That is a supply chain issue upstream, and then. So it is very interesting case. Anyways, for the first session, that's it. Okay. Thank you.
We had all agreed, of course, that we would speak on our field of expertise or analysis. As you all know, I am a professor of international relations, and I think that we have this notion, this perception, and it's a reality, that the world is clearly changing. We were so used to having this very ordered world, and not so anymore. Of course, when people tell me, during the Cold War, that was, everything was ordered and fine. Yes, it was fine, as long as you were not on the Iron Curtain side, or you were not living in a country in which proxy wars would devastate everything within it. But this perception of change, and for my students, is sometimes very difficult to explain, to bring it to life. I usually use 3 areas or 3 themes. The first one is the Arctic region. We tend to think of the North Pole, the polar bears, and so forth. It's one of the hottest fields of competition between states nowadays. And in fact, one of the impacts, if we can put this mildly, of Putin invading at a greater scale Ukraine was the fact that the remaining countries of the Arctic Council are now all NATO members, with one exception, which is Russia. It's an area that is changing due to climate change, due to a lot of things, and that can open up new routes in terms of commerce, new routes of navigation, but also competition for resources. The second area is the issue of semiconductors and the geopolitics behind it. You can talk about Taiwan, you can talk about South Korea, you can talk about the US, you can talk about this extraordinary company in the Netherlands that specialized in doing the hardware for actually being able to produce the so-called chips. The third is, of course, critical raw materials. All my colleagues have already highlighted many issues. What I would like to highlight in this particular area is, first of all, as a professor, to raise awareness of this issue. So I usually use a lot of, very practical examples. For instance, when I go and do an X-ray, there's rare earths there that I need to do that. The electrical vehicles, our mobiles, our televisions, everything. There's rare earth and critical raw material in so many things that we use daily that we are not even aware of that. I have been studying this theme for quite some time. I have to be honest with you, of all the rare earths, I have this really passionate affair with dysprosium. It could be worse, I know. And the second one is, of course, thulium, because in Portuguese it's Túlio, and it always reminds me of Marcus Tullius Cicerus, which was one of the best Romans of all times. But the issue here is that we really need to incorporate all of this into our daily lives. And in doing so, we actually realize that China, has already been said, was very intelligent, had a very clear strategy. They became the factory of the world, and they also concentrated, they had a lot of reserves and resources, but in cases in which that was not the issue, what they did, they specialized in processing, manufacturing, and delivering at a very good cost, because everything was quite near within the country. There is this very famous sentence of Deng Xiaoping, which basically says, oh, the Middle East has oil, we have rare earths. And he said this quite some time ago. So the point here is we are looking at a specific case in which there is so much going on. We are not doing enough. When we think of industries, when we think of environmental, when we think of labor, we have to incorporate all of this into our daily discussions. One thing that I would like to highlight, and this is an exercise that I do with my students, is to try to imagine, taking into account these three big areas, try to imagine how the world will be in terms of great power competition in the coming decades. And if you look at this geography of rare earths, critical raw materials, lithium, graphitum, all of this, cobalt, nickel. There are countries if they play their cards right, they definitely need to be more analyzed and included in our discussions. Look at Australia. Australia clearly has the resources, and let's hope the foreign policy and the strategy to be a key player. Let's look at Indonesia and the issue of nickel. Let's look at a country that is war-torn, difficult, an enormous example of how so many things fail, Congo, and cobalt. Let's look at lithium. So in terms of the geography and the impact of all these resources, there is a clear change. And in this sense, perhaps in 20, 30 years from now, the geography of power, the geography of where we are used to looking at is, of course, different. And in terms of the photography of the world, when I look at the European Union, which we always have to state, I know it's redundant, but we really need to say this, it is not a state. And that introduces a lot of tension, noise. One of the things that actually worries me a lot is the tensions between the member states, and of course the big ones, and the policies of the European Union. Take one case at point, Germany. We are now discussing, or we should be discussing more, all the bad strategies or the big mistakes that the auto industry is making in Germany regarding China or regarding Xinjiang. I'm not even going to go into the human rights abuses and so forth. Let's just focus on the strategy issue. And as someone already pointed out, it's a tough decision. If most of your exports, either electrical vehicles or not, is in China, even if in the long run your technology will end up being reduced to zero in terms of your advantage, what do you do? And I think it's actually a good point looking at all of this. One thing is for the European Union, and particularly Ursula von der Leyen, and the Act on Critical Raw Materials was, from a strategic point of view, extremely interesting and relevant, perhaps a bit too optimistic in terms of calendar, but nonetheless, it was, strategically speaking, a very good document. The point here is the differences, the national policies, the internal electoral dynamics of all these countries. So for me, perhaps the greatest hurdle for the EU or the Europeans to actually matter in this world of high technology, of issues of to diversify and to be able to make the transition into a green economy and a digital economy is actually within it, much more than outside. Outside, of course, everybody is in huge competition for everything, but I think that the main hurdles are actually inside. And that is actually something we can actually work on. So on this more or less optimistic, pessimistic thought, I now pass the floor to Bianca, and I really enjoyed when she said that Iberia, although I do prefer Portugal and Spain, you know, just for historical reasons, those 60 years of domination to a certain extent, you know, they still stink. But besides joking about this issue that perhaps in this particular area, we are actually looking at the wrong players. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raquel. I think that what you've just said is music to my ears. I don't know about Iberia, but certainly, I think it's music to our ears, because we certainly, at this time of unpeace, at this time of great rivalry and great competition globally, we need to look within. Maybe the answer is not outside, or maybe just trying to do just kind of at the moment when the global anxiety goes on steroids globally due to, you know, the post-pandemic, the war, the climate breakdown, these dependencies, this competition. Maybe there's a different way to look at things, more creatively, more maybe based on our ingenuity, right? Which is actually at the core of humankind. At the core of humanity is also the survival, right? But that is the competition, that is the struggle, and that is the anxiety. And I think we've had a lot, but certainly, I think that there's a new way, and maybe the Critical Raw Material Act also goes into that direction. Indeed, as you very well say, the speed has not been aligned, and that's basically the issue of Europe in general. And you also mentioned the fragmentation. Actually, 77% of the clean technologies emerging and companies, so the innovators in clean technologies in Europe, basically they say 77% of them, they acknowledge that the regulatory fragmentation in Europe is the main obstacle to scale. And scalability is our Achilles heel in Europe and in Spain and Portugal, obviously. No matter how good the resources we have, the universities that we have, the facts are clear. We produce 30% of the scientific papers globally, but only 7% of the innovations that land to market. And that's exactly the gap that we have. And that applies to all clean technologies and obviously applies to such a key topic as critical raw materials and how we innovate there, how we industrialize there. I think that is the key. Now, in terms of the the challenges that we have at the moment is, certainly in terms of the critical raw materials, well, we are very much aware of the, China's, let's say, dominance in this global race. But also let's look at the fact that this is about new superpowers. This is also an opportunity for new players to industrialize. At the same time, I think we need to be honest of the fact that, in the age of oil and natural gas, there was a different type of concentration of players. At the moment, in the age of critical raw materials and, let's say, clean technologies, the production of critical raw material, the concentration in the production of critical raw materials actually is quite different. It's much more concentrated, in terms of power. So, for example, lithium, cobalt, and rare earth, the top 3 countries leading the production on this represent a third of the global output. Congo and China represent 70% of the production of cobalt and rare earth. And also there's the same concentration, higher concentration than with regards to oil and natural gas in processing as well, with China, obviously. So certainly, that basically puts things into perspective. And with all this, what we can do is, I think you hinted at that, number one, and in Europe, we need a clear industrial strategy, and we don't have that. We don't have a clear industrial strategy with a clear stance on permitting, on procurement, and very importantly, on what are those key technologies where we want to lead globally. Draghi report said a few days ago, we've lost the solar race, we've lost the wind power, we've lost in so many clean technologies, but we still can have a chance in electrolyzers and carbon capture and storage, but we are at the tipping point. So how can we actually, still be in this race and not only playing the catching up, strategy, but the leading one. And let's not forget that Europe gave the starting gun in this clean tech race already back in 2000. With the let's say low carbon objectives and with the European Green Deal and with the decarbonizing our economy by 2050. But again, we failed in terms of how do we get this to action? How do we get this to implementation? That's our Achilles heel, and that's exactly the competitiveness of the US, where speed, scale, and simplicity is paramount. So that's where we need to double down. Number 2, we need to double down on investment. Investment is also paramount here, and if we talk about how do we step up in this clean tech race, and how do we bring innovations to scale, we need an investment plan. You mentioned Critical Raw Materials Act. Indeed, there's good targets, but also there's not enough incentives there to actually make it happen. So this will not happen out of the blue. And I mean here, how do we really energize a capital stack for scaling up these technologies, like from not only subsidies and grants, but public guarantees, blended finance. How do we actually press those buttons, those fast-forward buttons for reindustrialization in Europe? It is possible, but we need to make it happen. And number 3, how do we activate demand? And I mean here industrial demand. I think these are the 3 things where Europe needs to focus, and where actually Iberia or Spain and Portugal, we work actively from Cleantech for Iberia to really make this happen. And I would say, with really good progress in short time.
Thank you. Henry, please.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think, Bianca raised some really interesting points about, financing, permitting. So I think the fundamental issue is that we're facing a formidable competitor, and like China, which has plowed a lot of its own taxpayers' money into subsidizing industry. But for me, demand is really, really important, and And if you look at it, China is still subsidizing electric vehicle demand. It's got rid of the main subsidies, but it still has some subsidies. But the problem is that European electric car sales have fallen 4% this year. So that ripples through all of these other projects, and investors need certainty about demand. If you're going to invest millions or even billions in projects, you need to know that demand is going to be there. So we need to focus not only on supporting supply, but supporting demand. We need to, maybe, because if you look at the European countries, they cut subsidies for EV sales, and the sales just immediately fell. So we need to support demand, and that will help us build some of these supply chains to meet that demand. Because the problem is, if people get uncertain about demand, then a lot of that investment falls away really, really rapidly. So that's why I think we need policies that keep supporting demand. I would say, and the Draghi report was interesting. It said, give up on solar, which I think is sensible. There are certain areas where China's 10, 15 years ahead. They didn't start off the leader, but they've had that advantage where we probably could waste a lot of taxpayer money trying to catch up, and I think solar potentially is one of those. But something like wind, actually Europe is very strong in wind technology, and this goes right back to the late 19th century. We pioneered wind for over 100 years, right? So we're really strong in wind, so we need to think about how we protect that. And then you have industries like the automotive that are transitioning from legacy to electric vehicles. And the fundamental question is, will allowing some Chinese electric vehicles in stimulate them to go faster, or will it destroy them? And I don't really know the answer, because I think it's very hard to know. Because if we protect them, and this is my worry about the US, then they might just delay. And we've seen that they, if you look at the history, they were making fortunes in China when I lived in China 10 years ago. The European automotive companies were making fortunes out of selling petrol and diesel vehicles in China. They focused on misleading us about diesel instead of focusing on electric vehicles. And now they face this Chinese competition. So I think that Europe should be, the tariffs that Europe has voted on, I think it's a difficult balance, but I think we need to allow Chinese electric vehicles in, but we do need to slightly level the playing field. Yeah, but we can't completely protect our industry from any challenges, because then I fear that we would just delay the transition.
Thank you, Henry.
Okay, I just want to make 1.5 points. The half point is that European and US effort to create an alternative supply chain in their territory for critical minerals is facing huge difficulties. It is not just the problem of money. They have the money, they can subsidize. But it's a problem of available skilled workers to do this work. They haven't been doing this thing for decades. There's simply nobody out there working with the experience and the skill to do this processing of mineral, number one. Number two, environmental standards. The reason why most or practically all of these refining of rare earths and mineral gravitated to China for 20 years now or more is because China lower and relaxed environmental requirements. Are Europeans going to do that? No. And if not, then the subsidy will be multiplying even more, because the cost will be too high. And at the end of the day, the cost is a key issue in terms of stimulating demand. If you produce something which costs 2 times, 3 times more than your Chinese competitors, forget it. That's number one. Number two, I talk about the regulatory divergences between EU, US, and China, and I want to delve into that more. EU, as I said, a lot of rules, regulation, directives, and so on and so forth, out of the desire of many citizens for clean air and high environmental standard. The problem is it imposes a cost on the citizens, and the cost is now being realized. Look at Germany. A lot of the support for the far right, besides the immigration problem, is the frustration with the coalition government pushing through higher environmental requirement for cooking stove, for heating, moving from even natural gas to electricity. The citizens are simply do not accept change in their behavior and higher cost, even though they do want clean air. That's a basic problem. Now, if you look into the US, if Donald Trump wins in November, then US will pull out of the Paris Accord. The Inflation Reduction Act will be repealed. The Environmental Protection Agency will be disbanded. Basically, US is out of this effort to achieve net zero. That not only delay everything for the rest of the world, but make the regulatory regime even more complex. Now, against US and Europe, look at China. China look at this clean energy, not only as something desirable in itself, which they do, but basically they look at it as strategic campaign to become self-sufficient, to combat and to fight back against the constraint and the containment by the US and Europe. Basically, in the past few years, these new energy vehicle, solar panel, wind turbine, and so on, already has driven the Chinese economic growth. Last year, without these three sectors, economic GDP growth won't be 5%, would be 2%, 3%. So going forward, they will invest more in these leading edge technology to be self-sufficient, to take the command lead, but the sector will be the new engine, the new growth model for China. So if you look at the three models, EU, costly, and imposing the cost on the citizens to bear, US risking of going backward, sliding backward, and China moving forward, making use of this new technology, clean energy, as a new engine of growth. Personally, if I have to bet, I'm betting that China will win.
And now and now hopefully Sato will give us a less depressing view. I'm not sure.
But I'd like to mention from a different angle. It's okay. I'm much on the climate side guy, I think. But in Asia or even in Japan, people, they're not like green, the issues, and currently, because some people are crossing the debate between energy security and climate change, and because climate change costs a lot, maybe it's due to the critical mineral issue or something, but especially in Asian countries, they try to become much more rich in terms of GDP per capita, and they try to make some kind of production, say, plant or production facility, but not for renewable something, because it currently in the Asia still renewable materials are much more expensive. So say in case of Japanese power sector, some companies are trying to keep their coal-fired power plant with co-firing with ammonia. But ammonia is produced by gas. And they try to introduce this carbon capture and then become green ammonia, blue ammonia, and they try to keep low emission, but still they are, keen on ammonia, so that the Japanese government tried to, secure blue ammonia. And it is another, the supply chain issue. Because to get secure ammonia, it costs a lot, because ammonia is very, the risk material to deliver. So it is a really complicated issue even in Japanese power sector, and maybe in Asian countries, they are also very worried about stable energy. What is stable energy? Something. So in this regard, I really hope that supply chain of the critical mineral should be stable as soon as possible and should be much more cheaper, even for developing country. That's it.
Thank you so much. And just to wrap up, and then we go for the coffee break, I would just highlight this issue of the questions arising from the discussion or the non-discussion of these environmental, these labor costs or expenses, if you want to put it in a different way. I don't think that in European terms, our political elites are doing a good job at really explaining what all of this, means and the consequences, the pros and the cons, and I think that sometimes is very frustrating in the sense that if we do this, if we go for this model, if we try to do this, these are the costs, but these are the expectations and the things that we will be able to do. And that is, for me, something that really worries me in terms of the expectations, because we cannot forget that in terms of, in general expectations, we have a younger generation in Europe that has and should have higher expectations regarding climate change. And that also has an enormous electoral impact within the European Union. So with this, more or less optimistic, not very pessimistic comment, especially regarding after my colleague here on the right, I invite you all to our coffee break, and please come back in half an hour with really good questions for our debate. Thank you. I think we can, slowly start and give this really awesome example of starting 1 minute before time. We finish at 5:15, not only out of respect for the coming panel, which of course focuses on a very important point, the challenges faced by journalists in these very tough times, but also because I teach at 6 o'clock, and if there's one thing that really gets on my nerves is being late for class. So if you want to set the example, you really have to be on time. So we have all agreed that it would be best if we started the Q&A with the audience. So what I would like you to do, please, raise yourselves, because I lost my glasses and I can't see anything beyond the 4th row. I think I lost them. I'm not quite sure, which is even worse. But state your name, state if you're a student, what do you do, very briefly, in 2 sentences, and ask a direct question, please. Otherwise, I will have to cut you off. And I said this with a smile, okay?
Hi, I'm José Cordeiro. I have a simple question. Why are we focusing so much on production? For example, replacing gas cars with electric cars instead of focusing on public transportation? Because, for example, you're talking about Iberia, but sometimes it takes 10 hours with train or bus to go from Lisbon to Madrid. And instead of investing on that, so we can have people living on both cities and working on both cities, we're just focusing on cars, and more production, which is bad. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really a good way to start. Do we have a second question?
Yes.
I would prefer to have, if you don't mind, nothing against, but the first questions are always by the younger members of the audience. It's a rule. So, who was speaking? Yeah.
Ines.
Okay,
Hi.
Ines.
So
can you please stand up?
Yeah, sorry. So I am student of international relations, and my question is how Europe can reindustrialize if, for example, in lithography with ISML, Europe can't have free commerce, for example, with China, and how we can manage with that.
And with the United States?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think these are two good questions to start. Who wants to answer? I'm all about democracy. Yeah.
Reindustrialization is something nice. And all the politicians talk about it. President Biden talk about it. Vice President Harris talk about it. European politicians talk about it. But basically, for many countries, it is easier said than done. We have seen in the past few decades a tendency of a premature deindustrialization. Countries more and more see a shift from industries, manufacturing, in terms of share of GDP, in terms of employment, away from it for many decades now. And for advanced countries like Europe and US, it's very clear, visible. Also happened to developing countries prematurely. They start to deindustrialize when their GDP per capita is still very low. And there's many reasons for that. And if I go into all the reasons, I will exceed the five minutes limit that my moderator set for me.
I'm actually a nice person. I just want to say
you are. but for the purpose of our discussion today, I just want to point out that easier said than done. And secondly, you have to make sure that you reindustrialize in sector where you can be profitable. Because if you're not profitable, then it doesn't happen. Now, for Europe, what are the sectors that newly reindustrialized sectors can be profitable in the face of Chinese competition? Not automobile. What else? Solar, wind, consumer goods, white goods, refrigerator. I mean, where? Aircrafts? Is Airbus going to be still dominant for the next 10 years? Yes. But beyond next 10 years, with the Chinese aircraft is gaining altitude and gaining acceptance with much lower cost base. So basically, the main economic model of countries like Germany, the engine of EU, cheap energy from Russia, vast market demand from China, both are collapsing. So basically, Europe doesn't have a new growth model. And without a new growth model, don't talk about reindustrialization.
Thank you. More comments? Henry, can you just...
Would you like to go first? Or? Yeah? Oh. So reindustrialization, first, well, certainly it's simple. We need to reindustrialize because that means, green jobs and investment. That's basically why we need to do it. And I think that you said we need to reindustrialize on most promising sectors. I would say profitable sectors. I would say we need to reindustrialize on sectors where we have most competitive advantage. And if we look at the Iberian Peninsula, this means building on the clean energy superpower that we are, on building blocks like the industrial base, and building blocks like our leadership in green hydrogen, on already on our grid, but also building on our weaknesses. The grid, the interconnection with Europe is still not. It should have been already years ago at 80%. It's still at 6%, and that certainly is harnessing the competitiveness of our industry and of Europe in general. Because if we have the cheapest, green electricity, then why this doesn't travel to Germany to basically manufacture there with this energy?
Switch to
French, I think.
Exactly, yeah, that's another debate. Let's not enter these even more difficult debates. But certainly, you know, look at the Iberian Peninsula. I think the numbers are very clear. Green reindustrialization basically means, only if we look at clean energy, in terms of job, it means 2.65 million green jobs in the next years. If we look at investment, it means 150 billion euro of investments only in clean energy alone. It means, you know, talent. It means the skills, you know, the jobs of the future coming here. It means basically the region being a magnet for growth and jobs. And on top of that, we are also one of the regions here most affected by climate change, right? So I think we have the problem, we have the solution, and the green reindustrialization is the way. Now, coming back to the first question, cars versus public transport, well, you know, I also have this doubt all the time, but the reality is that, you know, it has to do with basically, you know, the behavioral change. It takes time. You know, we see already what happens with electric cars, right? I have an electric car, and I can go with it 140 kilometers max. So, you know, and we have problem with the charging stations, and I need to stop many times. So it's, you know, even this is a journey, right? So I think it takes time. Meanwhile, you know, we have this behavioral change in place, and more in place. I think we have the technologies that we need to deploy and upgrade and scale in order to basically transform, you know, our society. I hope I answered your question, and I'm happy to speak in the break more.
I think that there was just one small comment.
Yes, you said that Spain and Portugal have a competitive advantage in solar energy. In my view, I think Africa does. Between Morocco in the north to all the way to South Africa in the south, Africa produces more solar energy than Spain or Portugal at lower cost. And in fact, Morocco already export solar electricity to Spain via 2 cables. So I think that from that point of view, if Africa can develop, and I hope they will, then Europe will lose out on that as well.
Just to make it a little bit more.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think public transport, you know, it doesn't get enough praise or attention as helping to, you know, as being a savior or helping to decarbonize emissions. You know, it's probably done more than electric vehicles. And if you look at China, the high-speed rail network has done a lot in terms of those journeys used to be done by airplanes, and now they're done high-speed rail. But I think it's very hard to do an energy transition and also change people's behavior and also change the economic structure of all our societies. And I think you have to decarbonize as much as you can. So absolutely, buses should be electric. Fleets, but it's also, I think, if you look at the younger generation now, if you look at driving license applications in the UK, I think they've halved in a generation. So people are not learning to drive at nearly the same rate, and so we probably will move to a model of electric Ubers that will drive themselves. And I think Tesla tomorrow is going to launch a robo-taxi. So we'll see what that holds. But I think if you look at the shift, I think it's already happening that people are not learning to drive, definitely in cities. The other problem I think you find is, as batteries get cheaper, you know, you look at history, we always just increase demand as things get better and things get cheaper. So it's very hard to control that. You know, we'll just find more uses for things. It's like, as electricity gets cheap and green, we just find more ways to use it, right? And AI data centers are an example of that. Just in terms of reindustrialization, I do think there are some differences going forward from the past, which is when we're moving to you know, reducing emissions, there are some advantages to having a localized supply chain that there weren't in the past. When we start to have account for carbon, we have carbon taxes, etc. So that allows Europe some room to compete by using areas that have renewable energy, such as Sweden has a lot of hydropower. You mentioned Spain and Portugal. Industries can, in the future, will be advantageous for industries to shift. And we're seeing this within China. We've seen an extraordinary shift within China to provinces that have hydropower, like Sichuan province, Yunnan province. It's already happening within China, and that's something that will happen on a global scale, where you want industries to be where the energy is clean plus cheap. That's the ideal. So I think we should use those advantages. And some supply chains are better being localized. For instance, the automotive supply chain. You don't really want to be shipping lithium from China to Europe. So the ideal for Europe is that you ship within Europe. So you have plants in Hungary or Poland, or processing these minerals, or you produce and then send to Germany, whatever. And that actually makes cost sense. And I think what we saw with COVID and after COVID with shipping costs, etc., I think there is a business case now to have a more localized supply chain, not just, it's nice to, because the politicians want it. I think there is actually a business case, both that's come forward. So I think that will support some localization.
Does anybody want to answer the second question? It was the issue of the Netherlands having to back down because of the United States Chips Act.
That's the theme of the session, geopolitics.
And when you are a superpower, things matter. I was very happy to hear all these comments, especially to know that I don't have a driver's license, so I'm clearly a visionary in all of this. My husband has an electric car, so I'm all good here. And I think that the question of public transportation is really important. When I did my master's in London, and it was just unthinkable not to use the tube to go to school and back. It was just unthinkable. But at the same time, when I look at, for instance, Portugal, small country in terms of territory, at least continental, when we look at, when comparing to our neighbors, but there is a big difference. If you live in the countryside, the car is absolutely key. And I think that's also a perception that we have to include in our debates, because there is not good enough public transportation to the countryside. And I know this because I've lived in the countryside. And in that sense, it also introduces another divide between the countryside and the big cities to which everybody is going and living. So I think that would need a huge public investment. In order for you to do that and to, in a way, fight against the fact that people are leaving the countryside in order to go to the cities, that I think is a very big and useful discussion that we need to have. But in order for all of us to do this, we really need to have greater productivity, we need to be smart, and we need to have, to put it very bluntly, money. And in order to invest in our infrastructures and everything else. So I think your question is spot on. And I think that the issue of perhaps in 20, 30 years, our discussion will be the countries with the cars without drivers, which, to be very honest, it's really spooky for me. But that's me. I'm not young, so it's good. Second round of questions, please. Do you want to say something, Sato? Not yet. Okay.
Hello. My name is Nuno. I have degrees in economics and financial markets and environmental engineering and renewable energies. We have scientist Johan Rockström saying that we already moved more materials than the natural processes of Earth. And we also have Simon Michaud, scientist, saying that we won't have critical minerals sufficient for our needs in energy transition. And yet we keep debating on who's the biggest, either China, the US, or EU as the swinger between. So my question is, in 30 years, do you think we will have cars driving by itself, and the youngest will have more mobile things to do, and the planet is still working for all?
Alive and kicking. Good. Thank you. Another question, please. I have there.
I've got a mic.
There. Can you please stand up? Otherwise, for me, it's a big blur.
Muito boa tarde a todos. Em primeiro lugar, felicitar todos os elementos deste painel que tiveram intervenções de excelência e que se completaram uns aos outros. O meu nome é João Arrucha Pereira, sou consultor internacional de segurança, muito embora as minhas áreas sejam outras, porque fiz o meu doutoramento em resolução de conflitos internacionais e psicologia da paz, mas vejo também que há muita cobiça de determinados países em relação a outros por causa dos minerais críticos. E isso também tem gerado muitos conflitos. Aliás, sabemos, pelo menos foi dito aqui neste painel da manhã, que a Rússia não invadiu a Ucrânia só porque sim, não é só por questões históricas. Na verdade, o território que eles estão a ocupar na Ucrânia é dos mais ricos a nível de minerais. E, portanto, isso também tem sido gerador de muitos conflitos. Gostava de saber a vossa opinião sobre isso. E também outra coisa, eu penso que os custos com esta transição energética que já está a acontecer são um investimento, não são uma despesa. E gostava de ouvir a vossa opinião sobre isso, embora ainda há alguns políticos que considerem que isso é uma despesa, eu acho que não, que é um investimento. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada. Thank you very much for your question. Did you understand the question? Kind of. Yeah. Yeah. You should. Okay. Thank you. And then I have two youngsters here in the mid row, there and there, as we say in the debates, preparing.
Can I? Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Felso. I'm a student, a master's student of political science and international relations. So my question is actually related to a comment that I heard, I think, from Professor Raquel Vaz Pinto, when she said something related to the global south not being part of the menu anymore and starting to be no. Oh, okay. So my bad. Sorry about that. So yeah, how do you, and maybe it's directly directed to Dr. Hang Tran, how does the global south cease being part of the menu and starts being having a seat at the table, in your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I think we'll do these three now, and then I have two more youngsters, at least compared to me, here and here. Okay, just a second. Can we go for these?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. On the first question, in 30 years' time, I guess you mentioned how we will be. Well, let's take into account that in 30 years' time, if we continue to extract the way we are doing at the moment, we will have extracted the same as the entire humanity since the beginning of time has done so far. So that's pretty a lot. So certainly, I think just by saying this, without being an expert, it's just the common sense is saying to us we need a radically different approach. In the morning, there was a comment by, I guess, Catherine, saying we need a radical creativity. I would say we need radical creativity and radical innovation. And we need to do it fast. And let me just say that in Europe, what we can do in Europe, let's talk about what we can do, the solutions, and what is needed, and what is possible today in the critical minerals race. At the moment in Europe, we have companies that are scaling up innovation and are giving us answers. This is happening as we speak. It is happening in extraction, exploration, using AI, using different technologies. We have companies very active in refining and processing, in recycling. There's, for example, a company, a scale-up in Germany called Silent that is actually developing the next generation of lithium battery recycling. How funny that they received 62 million of investment from VCs, but their competitor in the US have received 2 billion in loans, and as a result, 1.2 billion in VC. So obviously the rate of scale is different. They both are amazing, they both do fantastic job, but the support is different. So that's where we need to work. Hydrovolt in Norway, doing exactly the same. Novo Litio in the Iberian Peninsula, a company very active in this space. Substitution, we have in Latvia, NACO Technologies developing a nano-coating technology which increases the efficiency and lifetime of critical components in electrolyzer. In Valencia, where I'm coming from, we have Mateco, a company that is actually producing the next generation of catalyst electrodes for green hydrogen production. This is relies on novel non-PGM, so definitely no critical minerals involved. It's ready to scale, and on top of that, it increases the efficiency of the electrolyzer in a 30%. So you know, a lot of things there. And the examples can flow. I mean, I have 2 pages of examples. So this is happening as we speak. We have solutions today, we need to scale. And what I think, and we think at Cleantech for Iberia and our partners, that what Europe, and we've called Europe to do this, what Europe needs to do now in order to really bring skin in the game is to basically, we propose an operations warp speed, just like on the fashion that US did during COVID with the vaccine, which means EU sovereignty fund to bridge the financing gap for low carbon critical raw materials projects. Doing this means really blending public and private collaboration and funding in order to make this happen and have it as a top priority. If Europe does this, these companies will scale fast. Not only that, we'll have many others that are there struggling in the valley of death and that are not able to basically scale because we don't have enough de-risking strategies in Europe. We don't have enough public money to act as a catalytic effect for the private investment. Just in our coalition between Spain and Portugal, the investment funds that we gather have today a combined fund size of 1 billion euros available today to invest in net zero solutions as we speak in emerging clean technologies. So we need to really unlock this because there's money, there's solutions, there's innovations, but basically somehow the magic is not happening. So we need to speed up and we are working on this, but that's where we need to basically enact change. On the second question, very clear, very briefly on the Ukraine, I think very funny that not only that, you know, the fact that Ukraine sits on large mineral deposits, and then how funny that just 8 months after EU and Ukraine collaboration agreement was signed on actually, you know, on working together in the supply chain of critical minerals, the war started. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, that's the main reason of war. Of course not. I don't know, but certainly this is a fact that we cannot ignore.
It's a very interesting coincidence, isn't it? When you look at the portion of land that Russia wants from the Ukraine happens to coincide with the industrial part, with the minerals, with graphite and graphitum and so forth. So, you know, amongst other things, you know, it's good.
I'll just address the question of, you know, future shortages. I think the problem has always been not shortages, it's been abundance. So, you know, everyone predicted oil and gas would be short, and then we had a shale revolution. We've just always had this ability to find new resources, which has meant we keep using gas, we keep using oil, because we keep finding too much as a problem of abundance. And I don't think critical minerals are going to run out or there's not going to be enough. You know, we're going to have enough. It's just the question of what cost are we willing to bear to extract them, what kind of carbon price are we going to put on them, and how the geopolitics play out. I would say that it's incredibly difficult to forecast technological change. If you look, 20 years ago, we were talking about fuel cell vehicles. I remember, George Bush in the early 2000s, it was all about fuel cell vehicles. People were talking about solid-state batteries, but actually sodium-ion batteries came out, which is an interesting technology. So it's very, very hard to forecast the future of technologies and therefore mineral demand, which is part of the problem why you have such volatility in prices, because it's very hard to build a mine is a 10, 15-year project with billions of dollars, and you have no idea in 15 years' time what demand is going to be like. So that's why it's so incredibly difficult. So I don't think the problem is we're going to run out. We've got other problems, I think.
Yeah. To the first question, public transportation. I think that we talk about buses and train and so on and so forth. But I think that in the interim, at least, things like Uber or in Asia, Grab, which I came back after a month in Asia, is becoming popular, particularly in Vietnam, where the Grab using electric vehicles is becoming very popular and it's very cheap. You have an average trip in the city, in Ho Chi Minh City, costs you about between $1.50 to $2 per trip. So many of my friends, acquaintances, and people in Vietnam, they don't buy cars anymore because in the big city it's costly to keep the car, insurance, maintenance, and so on. They just go and use their iPhone to order Grab. 2 minutes, car is there, take you anywhere, very cheap. So I think that should be part of the solution. In 30 years' time, I think that self-driving cars will be a reality. And in fact, in China, it is becoming a reality. In the past 5 years, we talk about competition for 5G. China is the only country where they build out 5G base station everywhere. 5G means short communication, so they need a lot of stations to transmit from one station to another. And with the density of stations, millions of them, the Internet of Things is something which is already working in big cities in China. So with the Internet of Things, car can have the instruction, back and forth interaction with the environment, and self-driving car, I think, will be again, one part of the solution. I probably would not like to ride in one, but it is certain limits of resources. I think we have to distinguish between two kinds of limits. One is physical limits, and the other is economic limits. The physical limit, like my colleague said, going forward, you always discover new deposits of many things over time. So it's not clear if we really run into absolute physical limits. But even if that is the case, the economic limits is very flexible. If you are willing to incur the cost, you can raise the supply. Fracking of oil. 10 years ago, nobody knows that the US can one day become exporter of crude oil, which it is now. Largest producer of crude oil and very strong competitor to the OPEC countries in terms of exporting oil. Why? Fracking. Higher cost, but you raise production. So these kind of things are a little bit flexible. Last point, Global South. Very simple. My prescription is very easy. One, each of the countries in Africa have to get its own house in order. And number two, learn to trust each other and cooperate with each other and act in unison as a unit vis-a-vis Europe, China, US. Then you can demand, and basically you have a seat at the table. Until you do that, you don't.
Drama. Sato, do you want to say something?
No, next time.
No? Okay. Next round of questions. I have these two here, please.
Hello. My name is Mauricio. I'm also a student here in Lisbon of International Studies, Masters. Thank you all for your presentations. I do have a question about the next generation or the new generation. What do you think are the gaps or areas that we students should be focusing on regarding matters of critical minerals. Thank you.
In terms of future dissertations and so on.
Could be, yeah, but in terms of topics, projects, ideas.
Okay, thank you. So self-interest there. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Luis Duarte. I'm a master's student of Political Science and International Relations. I would ask the panel if I could make a slight provocation. More liberal actors claim that European market regulation harms the European industry's capability to innovate and compete with China. And on the other hand, it appears that one of China's strategic advantages was precisely the fact that there was statal intervention in the economy, which allowed for Chinese industries to get ahead of the rest of the world in terms of processing and manufacturing with critical minerals. And so I'd like to ask, where do we stand? Should we bet on more strict strategic directions from the EU's regulators, or should we reduce regulation in order to make European industries more innovative and competitive? Because there seems to be a gap in arguments between some arguing for stricter, more strategic regulation, and others claiming that it was precisely regulation in terms of, for example, carbon emission goals that harmed European industries' capabilities to compete now with China. Thank you very much.
I mean, you said a provocation. I was actually expecting, something a bit more fiery. But it's a very good question. Thank you. Do we have more questions, please? I see that young man in the back.
Yeah. So I'm Guilherme Ferreira. I'm an high school student. And actually, my question is pretty simple, but it's a little more difficult to answer, I believe. Mr. Tran talked about the problem that Germany is facing because of the young people, the negativity that some people feel about some rules, some ideas to take to a healthier future, a healthier planet. And what do you think there are the measures, what we should do to change that mindset in the young people?
Guilherme?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Guilherme. That was a very good question. Can we just take these three and start answering?
I just yeah.
I can. Yeah.
No, this is women leading. I mean, obviously.
I'm happy to answer such fantastic questions. Thank you very much. On the first question, on the gaps or topics in that where we should focus as a young generation, I would say entrepreneurship. So work on innovation. A great topic in Europe could be the second life of batteries, where actually Europe can lead globally. So I think that's in my opinion, that's where we should focus around this topic. On the second question on should we reduce regulation? Europe focused again. I think we need we all know Europe is a powerhouse in regulation, but we are falling behind in scalability. So, we don't do anything by continuing to regulate, and actually we are the #1 in regulation in critical raw materials. So what I say is more carrots and less sticks in Europe. That's what we need. So we need more incentives, more support, and less hurdles to entrepreneurs and to innovators. You cannot, as an entrepreneur, feel that you need to be lucky in Europe in order to access funding. Mm-hmm. I talked many times with entrepreneurs, and they say, this is like going to the casino. If you're lucky, you get it. If you're not, well, you don't. This cannot be like this in Europe. So at the moment, I think that, with the Draghi report and with everything that is happening, there will be changes. So, it's. I hope it's going to be a better and better time to be an entrepreneur in clean tech in Europe. But for that to happen, we need more carrots and less sticks in the political leadership. leadership. And on the third question, people's reaction to rules regarding a healthier future, a planet, you know, I certainly think that we need to change mindsets. I think this is what basically we need to do at the moment. This takes time, you know, just like it takes time and it takes a lot of action to reduce those 52 billion tons of emissions that we actually are emitting annually, you know, global level. And you know, changing mindsets, it takes time, and we are short in time, so it's basically time to scale, and certainly that's a we need to orchestrate the velocity of this change, you know, as we change behaviors, as we change mindset, and you know, we basically integrate in a systemic way, you know, people's reaction, society reaction to this. You know, we need to develop also the technologies that will get us out of the woods in this poly crisis globally.
Yeah, I think the common theme to all three questions is the role of political leadership. Someone said that politics is the art of making the impossible possible. And if you judge by that standard, European leadership has failed.
The possible to impossible.
So basically, the whole thing is balancing. You need to make regulation to set standard, to get industry, business, society to move to higher environmental standard. But you cannot let it run too much ahead of what the people are understanding, convinced of, ready to accept, and ready to pay for those measures. Because if you have a gap, then for sure you will be voted out of office. So problem in Europe is that there's a gap now, particularly in countries like Germany, I mentioned before. The environmental standard has been ambitious, set too high, and then the people now starting to realize that the kind of things that they want to have via polls, via election, they really have to pay out of their pocket, and they don't like that. So I think that the art of political leadership is to reconcile the two, to raise standard, to educate, to convince people to accept the standard, and the hardship and the payment to go with the standard. There's no free lunch. And that is the saying that you hear a lot in America, but not enough in Europe. No free lunch. People want to have free lunch. No free lunch, except at the conference. That's number one. And number two, for young students, young people here, I think that my personal observation, having lived in Germany for 4 years, in London for 4 years, is that risk-taking and startups, there's a lack of culture in Europe for that. Because right now, if you look at startup, where new business, new opportunity, new invention, new things are happening, you find it in US and China, not in Europe. So that is one thing that young European should we share the same view, should really pay attention to.
Yeah, so one of the questions, what young people should study in critical minerals. I do think recycling, I agree, I think that's huge potential. We're seeing forecasts now that by 2040, you know, half of lithium-ion batteries could use recycled lithium, so there's going to be a huge potential. By 2050, I think we'll be closed loop pretty much for all of these minerals. So we're talking about 15 or whatever year period where we need mining, but eventually we'll move to closed loop. So I think how can we recycle in more environmentally friendly way, a cost-effective way? The other thing is just the processing of minerals. How can we, if you think about innovation that improves the sustainability and cut costs, that's such a holy grail, because you can compete with China, cut costs through, and be more sustainable. That's really, for me, that's like a real sweet spot, very interesting area. Yeah, on the question about regulation, I think, if you look at China, it's interesting. You look at the history of all the clean energy billionaires that they have in China. It's not so much that the government subsidized and supported these guys, it's that they were more capitalist than Americans. And a lot of these guys are so capitalist and so ruthless, and it's so competitive. I can't stress that enough. All of these billionaires came out of an environment in southern China in the 1990s, which was a free-for-all environment and incredibly ruthless, like the Wild West of capitalism, nothing to do with state. But what the state has done progressively is set policy continuity and policy goals. And you've seen this with Xi Jinping's, was it 2020? He came out and said, the dual carbon objectives, carbon peaking, etc. We've seen so many businesses just get behind that and rally behind that. So it's sort of setting that high-level direction and continuity, whereas too much in the West, we're victims of lobbying. So, we say one thing and then everyone lobbies and then the target's weakened, and investors just don't have certainty if there's all this lobbying. And we saw it with Trump, right? The same automakers that are now so into EVs were lobbying against EVs. So, we need to have that certainty, but it's not, subsidies aren't the reason for China's success by any means. Yeah.
I think that at this point we could also add the fact of their, I remember reading about the 90s in China and the issues that you have just described, wild capitalism, no rules, no environmental standards, no labor standards, and how all of that contributed as well to this, of course, double-digit growth and so forth. But what I find interesting also in the case of China is that we are dealing with a dictatorship. And in that sense, I think that in these points, if Xi Jinping and the party sets the goal towards whatever it is, in this case in particular, this change towards cleaner energies, I wouldn't say everybody goes along, but they definitely have to go along with it. So I think that in that sense, the fact that being a dictatorship, if you go wrong, you go definitely really bad. And really, look at the history of China's 20th century, just to, look at the Great Leap Forward, look at the Cultural Revolution, whatever. But I think that there's also here a political dimension. And it's true, in liberal democracies, things are messier, more debated. But I also think, for instance, of the case of India, which is a country that we don't talk enough about as well, and in which there were a lot of investments that, of course, didn't take off like in China, precisely because of a lot of internal issues, red tape and so forth, but also because there was a lot of discussion about the environment, labor, and so forth. So in that sense, in the medium and long run, maybe it may be more sustainable in terms of investment. It's a question mark. I have my own answer and my conviction, as you can all imagine, but so I think it's also an issue here in terms of competition. We also see that with artificial intelligence. It's not just this area, and I think that we cannot forget that political dimension to make it, in a very elegant way. But there are risks and prices to pay in terms of living in a dictatorship. So I think I just felt the need, to balance this a bit.
No, sorry, I forgot to address the question about what we should do in Europe. I think permitting is something that in the US they're looking at streamlining, and Europe we should, because there are projects that tick all the boxes that just don't proceed. There's a project in Sweden that the Supreme Court just hasn't got round to deciding on it for months and months. And I was reading in France a new lithium mine. They've spent months sort of thinking about it. And yes, there are projects that people won't want, but if there are projects that tick all the boxes, there shouldn't be delays. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Yes. Yes, boss.
Thank you. I myself. Well, I cannot resist. I think that we are painting a very bright future for China. And I don't buy that for two reasons. The first reason is that the economics of China is made upon the capitalist mantra of to produce more, to export more. If you do not produce more and more, to export more and more, the contract you have with the Chinese people will put your regime in risk. This is one. So, the way China depends on foreign markets is completely crucial for the regime. Two, aging. China, in 20 years, it will be 300 million less people than it has today. This will create a huge problem of having more people that depend on less people to survive. So, the economic and political trouble of China, this kind of economic and political trouble of China cannot be solved because they are full of critical minerals. So, my point is, how do you put this into your equation? And I'm asking you, Ung. Thank you, because I'm really very curious.
The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. A few things. China depends on export, yes. But export not only to the US and Europe, where the growth rate in the past 7 years has declined. China has, for geopolitical reasons, diversified its export markets away from the US and Europe, where it could face sanctions and constraints, to global south country. So at this point in time, China export more to the global south than US, Europe, Japan combined. And the growth rate there is still very high. So yes, eventually at some point it will slow, but at least in the foreseeable future, next 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, there's room for China to export more to the global south, not to US, not to Europe. So that's number one. Number two, the internal market of China is huge, still huge. It will be smaller in 20 years' time, yes, but between now and then, still a big market. And a lot of the things that China produces, EV, most of the consumer of Chinese EV is in China. The share of export of EVs from China is still a very small part of the total production. So it's not totally reliant on export. It's also a domestic market. And that's why all the German automobile companies want to remain in China because of the size of the market. Number three, yes, aging is a problem, but not only for China, for Europe as well. For US as well, for Japan as well. But China, what they hope to do is to try to move on and take a commanding lead in new technology, 5G, 6G, electric vehicle, and robots. So China, in the past 10 years, every year, installed more industrial robots than the rest of the world combined. So one day, already you go to big Chinese factory, very few humans. You see robots. Will robots be able to replace the missing workers in generating the value added to support the retirees? Well, that's a big question. That's what the Chinese leadership is trying to do. And basically, my answer to that question is that at this point, we don't know. It's too early to judge whether or not China will fail. And of course, there are a lot of people who think China will fail, or China will be able to make that transition. And of course, the Chinese leadership believes that they can. But I think at this point, I think it's premature to say that China will fail. It may, but at this point, we don't know.
China fails
Yeah, I mean, that's a next problem. If China failed, then we have a bigger problem on our hands. Yeah.
Does anybody want to add anything?
I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, but I think it's one of those regimes where, you know, no one will be able to predict it, but it will just very suddenly be over. And I think, you know, I lived in China for 7 years, and there was always these small things that you thought maybe that could lead to, you know, the regime being in trouble, and they always managed to find a way through. And they're incredibly paranoid, and this surveillance state that they built, obviously, you know, it's the dictator's dream, AI, and it's, you know, dictators would have dreamt of this stuff, the way that they can use technology to control. But it's still, for all its strength, it's one of, you know, it could just disappear. It will be very quick when it happens. But I do think, you know, I'm just looking at clean energy. I think they're very, very strong in clean energy. And as Hung said, that's accounting for more of their economic growth. Do they have problems elsewhere? They have huge problems. They've got huge coal sector they have to wind down, huge steel sector that's overcapacity, consumptions, they need to stimulate consumption. They have all these problems, but they have done well in clean energy, which is going to be one of the key sectors of this century. So they have other problems, obviously.
And if I could just add to this, I mean, as you all know, I'm slightly critical of the Communist Party of China, as you can imagine, and especially being a woman, which I honestly think is something that we don't talk enough about, the absence of women in terms of political representation in China in general, in which Xi Jinping is much worse. And I honestly want to see if all those incentives that he's now, stating that women should have more children and staying at home, taking care of the babies, good luck with that. I don't think it's going to be that easy. But coming back just to this, I think that the environment in general is a good case in which the 90s were terrible for the environment in general in China. That even meant, for instance, that people like Hu Jia, who won the Sakharov Prize in 2008, was an environmentalist, not NGO, but he was very active in this extremely important point. Biodiversity was declining in China. The air was, I mean, you would sometimes go to Beijing, and if you would walk a lot on the streets, you would, I mean, your clothes would actually be, I wouldn't say black, but they would definitely be darker. So a lot of problems. The party woke up really late to this issue. But when it did, when it started seeing an issue of public health, respiratory problems in their citizens, people in working age who are not able to work because of this, all sorts of these issues, the party, albeit having woken up late, they did wake up. And when they woke up, nowadays, it's not just, you know, internationally, we talk a lot about China being a partner in terms of the environment and climate change. True, albeit the coal issue, but at the same time, it is because at this point, environmental issues, clean air, clean energy is a key point of the party being able to deliver for its people and in terms of its political legitimacy. So I think it's actually a good example of how, although having, you know, arrived late and in the time persecuting everybody that talked about the environment, at one point it realized that it was an enormous hurdle in terms of their political legitimacy. So they learned. And I think that it's never a good idea to underestimate the ability of this particular political party to learn sometimes very late from many mistakes that they make in terms of strategy. So I think that it's actually a good case, these issues pertaining the environment. It's not just for foreign, it starts domestically. And this is an enormous issue, especially in the mega cities like Beijing, Tianjin, Shanghai, or Chongqing. So I think it's, sorry. I still have...
Ung, there is a flaw on what you said. which is this. Yes, China has the global south to sell, and it is selling. The question is that it is not being paid, and it will not be paid, because most of these countries in the global south are completely indebted now. They are not paying China. No African country in this moment is paying China, and the greatest debtor to China is Angola. Angola is not paying China, and they say, you have to wait. What is China to do? Is going to invade Angola? No. So my point is that there is a flaw in your point, in short term, and there is a huge private debt inside China, as you know. And when you speak about enlarging the domestic market, you have at the same time a huge private debt, probably the greatest in the world in this moment. So this is not to say that I want China to fail, because I know that if in the next 20 to 30 years, if China fails, the world stops. That's not my point. My point is that there are problems. Sorry, I forgot to say that.
Yeah, I think very short, because we don't want to get sidetracked into these kind of issues. I have a lot of sympathy with what you say. China does have serious challenges and serious problems, yes. But back to the issue of payment, and that is the difference between the Chinese version of capitalism or capitalism with Chinese characteristics, is that it will take payment in many forms. It doesn't have to be money. It can be a vote at the United Nations. To vote for a Chinese to be the Director General of XYZ, UN affiliate organization. So China is able to really use own form of interaction, economic, trade, FDI, investment, and get payment through political influences, which a capitalist economy like the US, Europe simply cannot do.
Anymore. We are not going to be locked in this. I have there and there. There, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Beatriz. I'm an international law student, and my question is, how does the global competition for critical minerals affect the commercial exploitation of deep seabed? Sorry. How does the global competition for critical minerals affect the commercial exploitation of the deep seabed? That's my question. Seabed. Yes, thank you.
Now there's one for you.
I'd be interested to hear Japan.
Deep seabed. Yeah. Deep seabed, right? Deep sea mining. Money?
Yeah.
Mining. Yes. Yes. Maybe several years ago, some Japanese entities tried to explore deep sea bed mining, but I think it is tremendously costs a lot. So that at this moment they try to discuss even between the cross border on the China, Japan, central line or something. But I think now it is probably it is suspended because too much cost. I understand.
Yeah. So deep sea mining is an interesting topic, but so the situation is you have this International Seabed Authority, which is a UN affiliated body that comes up with the rules for deep sea mining outside of 200 nautical miles off a country's coast, right, international waters, and they still haven't passed the mining code that then will allow people to get exploitation licenses. They're currently exploration. And I think it's a very difficult thing because they have to get a certain number of countries to agree, and we still don't know the potential impact of it. Also, we don't know the cost of it necessarily, and also the provisions have to be such that they have to compensate resource-rich countries for any lost income etc. So it's all quite complicated working it out. But then on the consumer side, it's not quite clear consumers will buy it. There's been boycotts and moratoriums. And then finally, as I said earlier, if you look at the market now is well supplied and prices for critical minerals are low. So it's hard to make the case for mining the deep sea bed when, like, our forecasts are until the end of the decade, markets are going to be well supplied. So it seems tricky. And then battery technology is really changing, as I said earlier. It's very hard to forecast. And 70% of the batteries used in EVs in China have no nickel or cobalt in them. So if that trend carries over to the West, you don't need nickel and cobalt from the deep sea, potentially. I don't know. But it's just very hard to forecast where technology is going to go from a mineral point of view. So I think it's always a potential, and we do actually factor it into our forecasts. But getting there still seems unclear to me.
I have one enroll there, and I think there's a question up here on the front. Yes? You want to make a question? So I had misleading information. Please.
Okay. Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm also a student at International Studies, so I'm just going to ask basically what I want to know for my thesis, but it's really interesting. First,
self-interest.
Yes, but it's an interesting question. So since we are in an increasingly divided world, that's the name of this conference, with rising China and aggressive Russia, I want to know if you think, I think you agree, but just to be sure, that if you think the US, the EU and other allies should work closer together on energy transition and green supply chains, and if they are working together, what do you think is their current level of cooperation, and how could they increase this cooperation? Because they seem to, at least with Biden and Ursula von der Leyen, mostly align on their vision for issues relating to the global order and especially to the importance of the energy transition. But there are still lots of trade disputes and things there. They don't seem to be working together with a plan, or at least trying to ease tensions. And it seems, in my opinion, I think they should work together. I would like to know your thoughts on this, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to answer?
Yeah, I think US-EU cooperation, it depends very much who wins next month. Yes. If Trump wins, forget it. If Harris wins, it's largely continuation of Biden's policy. US government will try to strengthen the collaboration between US and EU, but not without friction. And one clear example is the Inflation Reduction Act, where the US clearly subsidized production in the US of clean energy vehicles. And that pushed the EU to compensate by passing its own subsidy for European production. So a race to more subsidy. And this kind of friction and race to subsidy will probably continue, because one key priority for Harris is to bring industrial manufacturing jobs back to the US. And the US can only do that by subsidy, because without subsidy, natural economics suggests that it's cheaper for US companies to produce elsewhere. And that's what has happened in the past few decades. So to answer your question, the idea is yes, collaboration between US, Europe, partnership with friendly countries in the global south, India, Brazil, and so on, but not without friction.
Yeah, I'd just say that's exactly right. So when Biden launched this Inflation Reduction Act, huge subsidies, tax credits. I mean, Europe was really, I think, damaged by a lot of European companies moved to the US because they turned to their board and they said, well, do you want to have free money or do you not want to have free money? And many companies want free money, so they moved to the US. So I'd love to hear what Bianca thought, but I noticed a lot of companies even headquartering in the US. So I think the problem with the US vision is they want to do friendshoring, but what is America first and what is friendshoring? And no one can quite sort of work out. And they want friendshoring because, well, they can't open a mine in the US and they realize it's very hard to do that. But then they want America first on the other hand. So I think it's very difficult to know.
Okay. In the Pacific, if talking about the Pacific, Indo-Pacific region, there is one framework, IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, is Biden administration is trying to lead, and including India and the Pacific region. That is the first initiative is regarding critical mineral issue, but there is no, funding money, just the framework. Okay.
Yeah, well, on my side, I think it's been said. I couldn't agree more with you. And yes, indeed, with the IRA, many of our innovators have, been attracted much more by the U.S. Market. Also, because it's always, an attractive market, because there's investors there. The private investor ecosystem there is stronger in that sense. So here we are still working to build it. And if you look at the critical minerals, the VCs that are specialized here are almost non-existent. Why? Because the innovation around this space is capital intensive. So this is a heavy asset, space. There's long development timelines. These technologies have higher risks, and this is not aligned with the VC cycle, and that matters. And if on top of that we don't have de-risking policies and we don't have these catalytic funds that from public that can actually encourage VCs, and lower their risk, then that's what happens. And if on top of that the US brings these tax credits and free money, then obviously this is what happens. What I do see that there's certainly a lot of room for collaboration in this space between US and EU, and actually EU is really looking into opening up actively. I would say maybe this is not so well known, but actually it has signed, these strategic partnerships in the framework of Critical Raw Materials Act so far with countries like Argentina, like Chile. So it's like Europe is not standing still. I think this is very important. We tend to be so critical with Europe here in Europe, and indeed there's these forces, this really fast-changing landscape and context, but Europe is not standing still here. And it's true that when Europe moves, sometimes it moves like a tanker. So it can actually really bring skin in the game here. And hopefully with the Draghi report, hopefully some bold movement will happen and make Europe the go-to place for investments, because we know how to do it. We just need to get it done, right? So these cooperation agreements are taking place as we speak. So let's see if we can see more of this, and let's see where we stand with the U.S. elections.
I think that we are. I'm definitely going to be up all night working, but I think that we're all, looking at it. I think that, but independently of who wins. There is a change within the United States, an electoral change, dynamics of change, and these worries about producing at home, labors. I mean, let's look, for instance, at the end of the Obama administration. Obama signed the Trans-Pacific, what was it called? TPP partnership, right? Yeah. Yes. And during the campaign, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump said that they would not ratify the treaty. Why? American jobs. So I think that change is here to stay. And what I find quite interesting, honestly, is that within the European Union and within the United States, I mean, we are going to have a lot of areas of cooperation, even, I think, which I hope will not, but I'm not an American voter, even with the Trump administration, in many areas. One of these, and I think it also highlights the same problems as these issues pertaining environment and clean tech, is also the issue of defense. On the one hand, Europe doesn't do enough in terms of its own defense. We need to have a proper, bloc, and I absolutely agree with this. But on the other hand, if Europeans start developing their own manufactures. The United States goes ballistic because they are not buying the F-35s and the F-16s or whatever. So I think that it's also another area in which we can both be partners, and we are also competitions. We are also competitors. So I think that in general terms, it's a fascinating world to live in if you're a student of international relations. And I would like to thank all of you for all your excellent questions, particularly from the younger audience, which is always a pleasure. And I would also like for all of us to thank these brilliant speakers and all their areas of expertise. For me, was really a pleasure to moderate this panel. Thank you very much.